made you so angry with your child's teacher you went full Karen on them? Last Tuesday, my daughter was supposed to be getting presented her first place science fair award for a project she spent 2 months on, but with 20 minutes left until school started, she was still in her room. I went in to check on her and saw her in bed under the covers trembling. When I pulled them back, she was shaking with tears, the kind that kids cry only when they're more scared than sad. Please don't make me go, Mom. I don't want to go. I just hugged her and told her she could stay home, not wanting to pry. I held her until she literally ran out of tears, and it's only then that she told me what happened. Yesterday, during Mr. Coleman's math class, she felt it. Her first ever period starting. I'd already talked to her about it, so she walked up to his desk quietly and whispered, "Can I please go to the nurse? It's an emergency." But he didn't look up from his computer. "We're in the middle of a lesson. Sit down. Mr. Coleman, please. It's a female emergency." That's when he looked up at her, smiled, then stood up and announced to the entire class, "Kim thinks she's special. She wants to leave during my lesson because she has a little tummy ache." 28 kids turned to stare. My daughter's face burned red. She whispered, "Please, I really need to." "You're 11, he said loudly, walking around his desk toward her. "You're too young to have female problems. What's next? You're pregnant?" The class giggled nervously. Some boys laughed harder. "Please," she begged. My proud daughter who gives presentations to the school board, begging. "I'll come right back. 2 minutes. Tell you what," he said, now standing right in front of her. "Tell the whole class exactly what your emergency is, and I'll consider it." She stood there, frozen, tears starting. "Go on. We're waiting. What's so important? Say it loud so everyone can hear." She couldn't say it. Not in front of everyone. Not in front of the boys who already teased her. Not in front of her crush. "That's what I thought. Sit down. And if you interrupt again, it's detention for a week." She waddled back to her seat crying. Minutes after sitting, she felt the blood rushing immediately. She raised her hand again, trying her best not to cry. "Mr. Coleman, that's detention. Want to make it 2 weeks?" She went quiet and put her head down. 10 minutes later, she felt it soaking through to her jeans. Soon, she could feel the blood pooling beneath her. The girl behind her whispered, "What's that smell?" And my daughter started crying. She waited until the end of class, another 15 minutes. By the time the bell rang and she stood up, the blood was everywhere. On the plastic chair, down her legs, a dark red map of humiliation. "Oh my God!" someone screamed. "That's what happens when you don't know how to control yourself," Mr. Coleman said aloud for someone to hear. "She pooped her pants!" someone yelled. "No, I didn't," my daughter yelled back, but it was too late. Her classmates already had their phones out. They started taking pictures, recording her. "This is gonna go so viral," they were saying. My daughter ran out, leaving bloody footprints down the hallway. The students followed her and stayed outside the bathroom, banging on the door and taunting her. They only left when recess ended and they had to go to class. When she finished telling me the story, I sat there shaking. My brilliant daughter was now terrified to exist in her own body. "Mom, please don't talk to anyone about it." I told her I wouldn't. Said I was just driving to pick her up some ice cream. But in reality, I went to her school, still in my pajama pants, carrying her blood-stained jeans I'd found in her drawer. I stormed into the principal's office and without warning said, "Mr. Coleman forced my daughter to sit in her menstrual blood for 40 minutes yesterday." But Mrs. Davidson sighed like I was wasting her time. Maybe if Kim spent less time at home and more time with other girls, she'd know how to handle these situations. My eyes went wide. She begged him to let her go to the nurse. "Your daughter has a pattern of attention seeking. She cries over test scores and constantly raises her hand in class." Now this dramatic story. I was starting to see red. "Here are her bloody clothes." I dropped the jeans on her desk. She wouldn't even touch them. "Ma'am, you helicopter parents are why your children are so fragile. Why not let Kim problem solve? The problem is she bled through her clothes in front of everyone and students took videos of her." I was now yelling. That's when she shot back. "You know what Mr. Coleman told me? That Kim's been flirting with boys in his class? Maybe this was her way of getting their attention. Preteen girls can be very manipulative." She stood up, smoothing her skirt. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have awards to present." I followed her out and walked with her down the hall, into the gymnasium packed with hundreds of parents for the science fair awards. My daughter's empty chair sat on stage between the other winners. I stayed by the door as Mrs. Davidson walked to the podium and started adjusting the microphone. That's when I made my move. I walked straight at her toward the mic. Security tried to restrain me, but I ran by them and snatched the microphone. Other parents were looking on, not knowing what to do. I finally yelled into the mic, "My daughter won first place, but she's too embarrassed to be here because yesterday Mr. Coleman made her sit in her own menstrual blood for 40 minutes. The entire auditorium froze. Mrs. Davidson reached for the mic. "Security!" she hissed, but I wasn't done. I gripped the microphone harder and kept talking while hundreds of parents stared at me in shock. My voice got louder as I told them how Coleman asked my 11-year-old if she was pregnant in front of 28 kids. Parents started standing up from their metal folding chairs, and the sound echoed through the gym. 2 security guards rushed toward the stage, but a tall dad in a blue suit stepped right into their path and blocked them. More parents moved into the aisle and formed a wall between me and the guards. Someone's mom yelled to let me finish, and other parents started nodding and talking to each other. Davidson ran to the side of the stage where the sound equipment was set up. She grabbed at cables and tried yanking them out, but the teenage boy running the AV system pulled them away from her. He crossed his arms and shook his head when she pointed at the power button. Davidson's face turned red as she stood there helpless while I kept talking into the mic. I told everyone how students took videos of my daughter bleeding through her clothes and posted them online. My hands shook as I reached into my purse and pulled out Kim's ruined jeans. The dark stains were still visible even after I'd tried washing them. I held them up high so everyone in the back rows could see the blood. The gymnasium went crazy with parents yelling and demanding answers from Davidson, who was backing away from the angry crowd. Security finally pushed through the parents and grabbed my arms. They pulled the microphone away and started walking me toward the exit. Parents rushed over as we moved through the gym, and dozens of them surrounded us in the hallway. Mothers were pulling out their phones and typing their numbers into mine. One woman said her daughter came home crying last week after Coleman wouldn't let her use the bathroom. Another mom grabbed my hand and said she'd been trying to report him for months, but nobody listened. 3 more parents told me similar stories about their kids being humiliated in his class. We exchanged numbers in the parking lot while security stood there watching us. I drove home with my hands still shaking on the steering wheel. Kim was curled up on our brown couch with her knees pulled to her chest when I walked in. Her eyes were wide and scared as she looked at me. She asked what I did, and I could barely look at her face. I sat down and wrapped my arms around her small body. She was shaking as I promised we'd figure everything out together from now on. I told her I wouldn't make any more big choices without talking to her first. She buried her face in my shoulder, and I felt her tears soaking through my shirt. My phone started buzzing nonstop on the coffee table. Text after text came in from parents who were at the ceremony. One mom wrote that her daughter came home crying last month when Coleman made fun of her for needing the bathroom during a test. Another parent said Coleman Coleman told her son that girls were just dramatic and looking for attention. More messages kept coming about things he'd said and done to other kids. Later that night, after Kim went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. I started typing out everything that happened from the beginning. Kim had helped me remember the exact words Coleman used and the specific times everything occurred. I wrote down every single detail we could remember about that awful day. The email to the superintendent and school board took me 2 hours to finish. I attached photos of the bloody clothes and included the dates and times of everything. My phone buzzed again with a text from a parent I didn't know. She sent me screenshots from a group chat where kids were sharing the videos they took of Kim. The messages under the videos made me sick to my stomach. Kids were calling her gross and saying she did it on purpose for attention. They were making jokes about the blood and planning to tease her when she came back to the school. I saved every single screenshot to a folder on my computer labeled evidence. More parents kept sending me things they found online, and I saved all of it. Kim came back downstairs because she couldn't sleep and saw me looking at my phone. She asked what I was doing, and I tried to hide the screen, but she'd already seen it. Her face went white when she realized how many kids had shared the videos. Something feels off about Coleman's behavior here. Why would a teacher risk his career by publicly humiliating a student over something so basic? Makes me wonder if there's a deeper pattern, or if he genuinely doesn't understand what he did wrong. She started crying and asking how many people had seen them. I didn't know what to tell her because the view counts kept going up. She was shaking and saying everyone at the school would hate her forever. I held her tight and promised we'd get the videos taken down somehow. She cried harder than I'd ever seen her cry before. I carried her to her room even though she's getting too big for that. She held on to me like when she was little and scared of thunderstorms. I stayed with her until her breathing got steady and she finally fell asleep. My phone kept buzzing with more messages, but I turned it to silent and just held my daughter. The next morning came too fast and Kim was still sleeping when I grabbed my phone and looked up the school counselor's number. I dialed Tess Kirby's direct line and she picked up on the second ring. I told her everything that happened with Coleman and the blood and the videos. She gasped and said she'd clear her whole morning for us. Within an hour, we were sitting in her office while Kim picked at the sleeve of her hoodie. Tess handed Kim a laminated pass that said she could leave any class at any time without asking. She explained Kim could use the private bathroom near the nurse's office and showed us where they kept extra supplies. Tess suggested Kim could start with just mornings at the school and see how it went. Kim nodded but didn't say much. After leaving Tess's office, I drove straight to the district building and asked for the Title IX coordinator. The receptionist pointed me to Clarissa Mercer's office on the 3rd floor. Clarissa took notes on a yellow legal pad while I went through everything again. She explained the investigation would take several weeks and gave me a packet of forms to fill out. That afternoon, my friend from book club texted me about a lawyer who helped her sister with a school issue. I called Fatima Aguilar's office and her assistant said she could see us tomorrow. The next day, Fatima sat across from us in her conference room reviewing the evidence folder I'd brought. She agreed to take our case without charging us anything. Within hours, Fatima had her assistant sending letters to the school demanding they preserve all security footage and emails. She filed takedown notices with every social media platform we knew about. She explained that sharing videos of a minor in distress was illegal. The school board meeting was in 3 days, and Fatima helped me prepare what to say. I went to the district office and wrote my name on the public comment sign-up sheet. My hand was shaking, so bad I could barely write. That evening, I got a text from another mom saying the teachers' union was already defending Coleman. She'd heard they were saying he deserved due process before any action was taken. My stomach turned, thinking they might protect him. 2 different mothers reached out after hearing what happened. One said Coleman had mocked her daughter for asking to use the bathroom during a test. The other said he'd told her daughter that girls were always being dramatic. Both of them sent me written statements about what Coleman had done to their kids. They promised to submit them as part of our complaint. 3 days later, I got an email saying the district had placed Coleman on administrative leave while they investigated. It wasn't enough, but at least he wasn't in the classroom anymore. Mrs. Davidson was still principal though, and that made me mad. Tess called and asked if Kim could come write an impact statement about how this affected her. We went back to her office and Kim sat at the computer typing slowly. She wrote about being scared to go to the school and how she couldn't sleep. She wrote about feeling dirty and broken. When she finished, she was exhausted and we went home. More parents kept contacting me with stories about Coleman. One dad said Coleman had embarrassed his son for crying after failing a test. Another mom said he'd made fun of her daughter's stutter in front of everyone. I saved every message and forwarded them to Fatima. The school board meeting was tomorrow and I practiced my speech over and over. Kim helped me time it to make sure I stayed under the 3-minute limit. She said I should mention the other kids he'd hurt too. That night I couldn't eat dinner. Kim made herself a sandwich and brought me crackers, but I felt too sick to eat them. She sat next to me on the couch and we watched cooking shows until she fell asleep. I carried her to bed again even though my back hurt from it. The next morning Fatima called to go over the plan one more time. She reminded me to stick to facts and not get emotional even though that would be hard. She said she'd be there in the audience for support. I put on my only business outfit and drove to the district office. The meeting room was already filling up with parents and teachers. I saw Coleman's wife in the back row and my hands started sweating. When they called my name, I walked to the podium on shaky legs. I unfolded my paper and started reading about what Coleman did to Kim. I kept my voice steady even when people gasped at the details. I mentioned the other students who'd come forward with complaints. I asked the board to take real action to protect kids. When I finished and sat down, several parents clapped. The board members looked uncomfortable and said they'd take it under consideration. After the meeting, 3 more parents approached me with their own Coleman stories. One mom started crying when she told me what he'd said to her son. I gave them all Fatima's contact information. Over the next few days, Fatima filed more paperwork with the district. She pushed for a full investigation into Davidson's handling of the situation too. She said we had a strong case for a hostile environment claim. Kim slowly started going back to the school for half days. Daniele Roman was subbing for Coleman's math class, and he was really nice to Kim. He showed her where the bathroom passes were and told her she never had to ask. Some kids were still mean, but others were supportive. Her science teacher gave her a hug and said she was proud of her. The lunch lady saved her favorite cookies every day. Kim started eating lunch with Tess twice a week to talk about how she was doing. 3 days later, Fatima called me with news that made my hands shake. She'd been digging through the school's security system policies and found out they had cameras in every hallway, including the one outside Coleman's classroom. She drove straight to the district office that afternoon and filed an emergency preservation request before they could delete anything. The IT director tried to claim the footage gets overwritten every 7 days, but Fatima had already checked the retention policy, which said 30 days minimum. She stood there in his office until he signed the preservation order and gave her a receipt with the exact date and time. The next morning, district lawyers showed up at her office trying to narrow everything down. They wanted to limit the investigation to just that one incident in Coleman's class, but Fatima wasn't having it. She pulled out a stack of papers showing every complaint filed against Coleman over the past 3 years, plus Davidson's response patterns. The lawyers kept insisting this was an isolated incident, but Fatima pointed to the principal's comments about Kim being manipulative and flirting with boys. She told them that showed a pattern of gender discrimination that went way beyond one bad day. They left her office looking worried, and she texted me that we had them on the defensive now. 2 days later, Kim had to do her interview with Clarissa Mercer at the district office. I sat right next to her holding her hand while she told the whole story again. Kim's voice stayed steady even when she described the blood pooling on the chair and the kids taking pictures. Clarissa typed everything into her laptop and asked follow-up questions about exact times and who was sitting where. Kim remembered details I'd forgotten, like which kids laughed the loudest and who kept filming even after she ran out. When Clarissa asked about Davidson's response, Kim repeated word for word what the principal had said about her being an attention seeker. The whole interview took 2 hours, and Kim needed a break halfway through to go to the bathroom and splash water on her face. Afterward, Clarissa said Kim did amazing, and that her detailed memory would really help the case. Over the next few days, Clarissa started interviewing other students who were in the class. Some kids agreed to talk and confirmed everything Kim said about Coleman refusing to let her leave, but several parents wouldn't let their kids participate at all. One mother actually called me to insist her son's phone was broken that day so he couldn't have taken any videos. I had screenshots from the group chat showing her kids' posts, but she hung up on me when I mentioned it. Another parent said their daughter was too traumatized to relive it, even though that same girl had been laughing in the videos. Fatima told me not to contact any more parents directly since it could hurt our case. That's when the anonymous messages started showing up on my Facebook and Instagram. People calling me a troublemaker and saying I was ruining a good teacher's career. Some messages said Kim was lying for attention just like Davidson claimed. Others said I was a bad mother who should have taught my daughter better hygiene. I wanted to respond to every single one, but Fatima made me promise not to engage at all. She had me screenshot everything and save it in a folder labeled evidence. The messages got worse over the next few days, with people saying they knew where we lived and that we should move away. I changed all our privacy settings and blocked dozens of accounts, but new ones kept popping up. Meanwhile, the school called to offer Kim homebound instruction while they figured out what to do next. How did Kim find the strength to type out that impact statement when she was already so tired? The way she wrote about feeling dirty and broken makes me wonder if writing helped her process everything or made it harder to face what happened. A teacher would come to our house 3 times a week to keep her caught up on assignments. Kim felt relieved she didn't have to face everyone yet, but I could tell she missed her friends and normal routine. She spent most days in her room doing homework or reading, but seemed lonely without her usual activities. The homebound teacher was nice enough, but it wasn't the same as being at the school with her friends. That Thursday, Kim's STEM club had their weekly meeting, and her teacher set up a laptop so she could join virtually. When Kim logged on, several classmates immediately typed supportive messages in the chat. Her mentor, Mrs. May, held up a card that said how proud she was of Kim's bravery. 2 girls from the club privately messaged Kim saying Coleman had been mean to them too. Kim smiled for the first time in days seeing her club friends rally around her. After the meeting, her teacher emailed saying Kim could virtually attend anytime she wanted. The next day, I had a meeting with the assistant superintendent about changing policies for bathroom passes. He seemed genuinely concerned and took notes while I explained how urgent medical needs should never be questioned. He agreed the current system wasn't working and promised to bring it up at the next administration meeting. But when I pushed for specific timeline commitments, he got vague and said policy changes take time to implement properly. I left feeling like he cared more about avoiding lawsuits than actually protecting kids. That afternoon, Fatima called with huge news about evidence. The custodial staff had come forward with documentation that they'd done a biohazard cleanup in Coleman's room that day. The janitor had to fill out special paperwork for blood cleanup and noted which desk it was. He'd even taken a photo of the stained chair before cleaning it because the amount of blood was unusual. Fatima immediately subpoenaed all custodial records, and the janitor agreed to give a sworn statement. This was exactly the kind of physical evidence we needed to prove Kim wasn't exaggerating. Later that week, a reporter from the local paper called asking for our side of the story. I started to answer, but Fatima had warned me to direct all media to her. She crafted a careful statement that focused on student safety and the need for better policies without attacking anyone personally. The reporter seemed disappointed I wouldn't give details, but Fatima said keeping things professional would help us more in the long run. 2 days after that meeting, my phone buzzed with a text from another parent who'd been at the science fair. She'd attached an audio file from a staff meeting 3 weeks ago where Davidson was talking to teachers about dealing with difficult parents. I pressed play and heard Davidson's voice clear as day saying helicopter parents were ruining kids and making them weak. She specifically mentioned my name and said I was the worst example of coddling. She told the teachers to stand firm against parents like me who wanted special treatment for their precious babies. The recording went on for 12 minutes with her mocking how some parents think their kids are too delicate for normal discipline. She even joked about how kids these days claim medical emergencies for every little discomfort. I immediately forwarded it to Fatima, who called me within 5 minutes. She said this was exactly what we needed to show a pattern of retaliation and dismissive attitudes towards student health needs. She filed an amended complaint that afternoon, adding retaliation concerns and hostile environment claims. That same evening while I was making dinner, Kim came into the kitchen holding her laptop. She showed me an email from a girl in her math class who'd been one of the kids laughing. The girl wrote that she was really sorry and felt terrible about what happened. She said she only laughed because everyone else was, and she didn't want to be the next target. She admitted she'd had her own embarrassing bathroom accident in 3rd grade and knew how awful it felt. Kim read the email 3 times while I watched, her fingers hovering over the reply button. She typed out a response, deleted it, typed another one, deleted that too. Finally, she closed the laptop and said maybe she'd answer it tomorrow or next week. I didn't push her, but I was glad at least one kid had the guts to apologize. The next morning, I called 2 of my closest parent friends whose kids went to the same school. We met at a coffee shop along with Tess, who'd agreed to help us figure out how to support Kim through this. We decided to meet every Tuesday morning to check in and make sure Kim and I weren't dealing with everything alone. One mom said her daughter had been asking about Kim every day and wanted to know when she'd be back. The other mom offered to pick up Kim's assignments and drop them off so I wouldn't have to go to the school. Tess gave us her personal cell number and said we could text her anytime if Kim had a bad day or needed extra support. Having that little network made me feel less alone in fighting this battle. Fatima spent the next few days working on a public statement about the pattern of schools dismissing girls' medical needs. She interviewed 3 other families who'd had similar experiences with bathroom passes being denied. She kept the statement focused focused on policy changes rather than attacking Coleman or Davidson personally. She said going after individuals would make us look vengeful, but focusing on systemic problems would get more support. She planned to release it right before the school board meeting to maximize impact. The meeting was set for Thursday night, and my stomach was already in knots. I'd written and rewritten my statement 20 times trying to get the words right. I practiced reading it in front of the mirror, but my voice kept shaking. When Thursday came, I put on my most professional outfit and drove to the district office. The meeting room was packed with parents and reporters. I signed up to speak and sat in the front row with my typed statement crumpled from my sweaty hands. When they called my name, I walked to the podium on shaky legs. My voice cracked on the first sentence, but I kept going. I told them about Kim's humiliation and Coleman's cruelty and Davidson's dismissal of our concerns. 2 other parents stood up after me and shared their own stories about Coleman refusing bathroom passes and making inappropriate comments. Then surprisingly, a young teacher I didn't recognize stood up and said the district needed better training on adolescent development and medical needs. She said teachers weren't given proper guidance on handling these situations. The board members took notes and thanked everyone for speaking, but didn't commit to anything specific. The next day, the district sent out an email announcing interim measures while the investigation continued. They said all teachers would now have to allow bathroom breaks for medical needs without requiring explanations. They also banned students from recording each other without permission and said violations would result in suspension. It was something but not nearly enough. Coleman was still teaching and Davidson was still principal. The email felt like they were trying to quiet us down without admitting real fault. The teachers union released their own statement that afternoon trying to walk a careful line. They said they supported both due process for accused teachers and dignity for all students. They called for collaborative solutions and better training rather than punitive measures. Their balanced approach actually seemed to help because suddenly the district seemed more willing to negotiate. They scheduled a meeting with Fatima for the following week to discuss potential resolutions. Meanwhile, Kim had to start working with her new math teacher since she couldn't go back to Coleman's class. Daniele Roman came to our house to introduce himself and immediately put Kim at ease. He showed her where he kept bathroom passes in his classroom and said she never needed to ask permission. He gave her his direct email and said she could message him anytime with questions. He even brought a box of her favorite granola bars to keep in his desk drawer. Kim actually smiled when he left and said maybe going back wouldn't be so bad with him as her teacher. 2 days later, Clarissa Mercer sent us formal notice about the investigation timeline. She said findings would be complete within 6 weeks, and we'd get a written report of conclusions. Having an actual date helped because the waiting and not knowing had been eating at me. She also said both Coleman and Davidson would be interviewed under oath, which meant they couldn't just make up stories without consequences. The district's lawyers reached out to Fatima about starting settlement discussions. They wanted to resolve things quickly and quietly, but Fatima said we wouldn't accept any deal that didn't include real policy changes. I told her I didn't care about money but wanted mandatory training for all staff and clear protocols for medical bathroom needs. I also wanted counseling services for Kim and any other students who'd been affected by Coleman's behavior. The lawyers said they'd consider our demands and get back to us within a week. 3 weeks later, Clarissa called me at work and I had to step outside to take it because my hands were shaking so bad. She said the Title IX investigation was complete and they found Coleman had created a hostile environment that denied Kim equal access to education. I sat down on the curb outside my office building and just breathed for a minute because finally someone official was saying what we'd known all along. She emailed me the full report that afternoon and it was 23 pages of documented violations, including witness statements from other students who saw everything. The investigator wrote that Coleman's actions showed a pattern of gender-based discrimination and his refusal to allow bathroom access for a medical emergency violated federal guidelines. Mrs. May holding up that card seems genuine, but why didn't anyone in STEM club speak up earlier if they knew Coleman was treating girls badly? The timing of all this support feels convenient now that Kim's case is public knowledge. I printed 3 copies and highlighted the key findings, then drove straight to Fatima's office where she was already drafting our response to the district. The next morning, the superintendent's office called an emergency school board meeting, and I watched from the back row as they discussed the findings behind closed doors for 2 hours. When they came back out, the board president announced that Mrs. Davidson would be immediately reassigned to a district administrative position pending completion of leadership training. She said Davidson had shown significant leadership shortcomings in her response to the incident, though they stopped short of admitting full fault. I saw Davidson leaving through the side door carrying a box of her things, and she wouldn't even look at me. The following day, we got official notice that Coleman was permanently removed from teaching any classes at Kim's grade level and would have to complete 40 hours of sensitivity training before returning to any classroom. He also had to write a formal apology letter to Kim, though Fatima warned me it would probably be written by lawyers. Meanwhile, Fatima's team had been sending takedown notices to every social media platform where the videos appeared, and most of them started disappearing within days. She showed me the compliance reports from Instagram and TikTok confirming removal of dozens of hosts, though she said some would probably stay in private messages forever. I tried not to think about kids still sharing them privately, but at least they weren't public anymore. Tess called that week to suggest Kim could present her science fair project to a smaller supportive group since she'd missed the big ceremony. She arranged for just a handful of teachers and the science department head to gather in the library after school. Kim practiced her presentation 3 times at home the night before, and I could see her confidence slowly coming back. When she stood up in that library and explained her research on water filtration systems, her voice was steady and clear. The teachers clapped warmly when she finished, and the science department head told her it was one of the most impressive projects she'd seen from a 6th grader. Kim actually smiled for real for the first time in weeks. 2 days later, the district held a parent meeting in the gymnasium to explain the new policies they were implementing. Over 100 parents showed up, and the superintendent himself presented the changes, including clear protocols for medical bathroom passes and mandatory training for all staff. Parents asked practical questions about implementation timelines and accountability measures. The angry energy from before had shifted to cautious optimism as people saw real changes happening. That night, Kim and I sat at the kitchen table with hot chocolate and had our first real talk about everything that had happened. I apologized for making the announcement at the science fair without asking her first. She said she understood why I did it, but wished we could have talked about it together. We made a plan to always check with each other before making big decisions about her situation. She wrote down 3 things she needed from me, including not posting anything on social media and letting her decide when to talk to friends about it. I wrote down my promise to include her in every meeting and decision going forward. Fatima called the next morning to say the district had accepted all our settlement terms. They agreed to fund counseling for Kim as long as she needed it, plus official policy changes district-wide. statewide, they'd mandate annual training for all staff on student medical needs and dignity. The district would also issue a formal public apology, acknowledging their failure to protect Kim. Everything we'd fought for was approved and would be legally binding. Kim started back at the school the following Monday, using her accommodation plan that Tess had created. She had a special pass that let her leave any class without explanation, and access to a private bathroom near the nurse's office. She avoided certain hallways where the worst kids hung out, but otherwise moved through her day with growing confidence. Daniele checked in with her every morning and kept those granola bars stocked in his drawer. She started eating lunch with two girls from her science class who'd been really supportive. By the third week back, she was raising her hand in class again, and staying after school for robotics club. Clarissa called me that Friday to invite me to join a new parent advisory committee on health education and student safety. She said they needed parents who understood the real challenges kids faced and weren't afraid to speak up about them. I accepted immediately because I wanted to make sure no other girl would go through what Kim did. The first meeting was scheduled for the following month, and I started making notes about all the policy gaps we'd discovered. Our fight had exposed so many problems beyond just Coleman and Davidson. There needed to be better training and clear protocols and actual consequences when adults failed to protect kids. This committee could help fix those systemic problems, and I was ready to do the work. 3 weeks later, the mailman dropped off a thick envelope addressed to Kim from the school district. She opened it at the kitchen table and pulled out a typed letter on official letterhead. Coleman had written 2 full pages about respecting all students and understanding medical needs. Kim read through it once, folded it back up, and stuck it in her desk drawer without saying anything. The next morning, I saw the local paper had run a front-page article about the district's new bathroom policies and medical pass procedures. They didn't name Kim, but described the situation as a wake-up call for better student protections. Parents at the grocery store stopped me to say they'd read about the changes and were glad someone finally stood up to the administration. That Friday, I picked Kim up early from the school and drove us to the ice cream shop I'd promised her months ago. We ordered huge hot fudge sundaes and sat in a booth by the window watching people walk by. Kim started telling me about her robotics project and actually laughed when chocolate sauce dripped on her shirt. The following week, maintenance crews installed metal dispensers in every girl's bathroom at the school. Kim stayed after class to help Tess stock them with pads and tampons, carefully organizing each shelf. She showed other girls where to find them and explained how the new system worked. 2 months passed before the district held their makeup science fair ceremony at the community center. Kim wore her favorite blue dress and walked across that stage with her shoulders back and chin up. She shook hands with the superintendent and held her trophy high for the photographer. Her science teacher gave her a standing ovation, and several parents came up afterward to congratulate her. Spring arrived, and Kim started spending Thursday afternoons in the STEM club room with a group of 4th and 5th grade girls. She taught them basic coding and helped with their science projects, but mostly she listened when they had questions. One afternoon, I overheard her telling them that bodies do all kinds of normal things, and there's never a reason to feel ashamed. The district newsletter that month announced that 3 neighboring schools had adopted our bathroom policies and medical pass procedures. What started with one girl's trauma had created new protections for hundreds of students across the county. Clarissa sent me the implementation reports showing every promised change had been completed on schedule. Training sessions for teachers happened monthly, and parent feedback stayed overwhelmingly positive. Summer vacation started, and Kim spent most days at science camp or reading medical books from the library. One evening while we were making dinner, she looked up from her anatomy textbook and told me she'd decided what she wanted to be. She said she wanted to become a doctor who helps young girls understand their bodies and feel safe asking for help. Watching her take notes and highlight passages showed me how she'd transformed everything that happened into something bigger than just surviving. We hadn't just gotten through it or moved past it or found closure. We'd taken the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it into protection for kids she'd never even meet. The girl who couldn't leave her room 6 months ago was now planning a future where she'd be the adult who makes sure no other girl goes through what she did. Thanks for hanging out and exploring all this with me today. Really was fascinating diving into those questions together. Until next time, friends, take it easy. Like the video. It helps more than you think.